you so much for being with us. Maybe just before we let her start, I'm going to present our guest and keynote speaker, Celia Izoard. From what I know about her, we met only in person yesterday. But it's like if I've known her for a long time. We've discussed, obviously, a couple of weeks ago to make that happening, that she comes from France to talk to you. But I've read her book. Maybe I can show it, if you want to show it. Yeah, it's called, I'll translate you in English after, it's La ruée minière au 21e siècle, enquête sur les métaux à l'ère de la transition. So I will translate that, if you allow me, to the rush to the mineral rush at the 21st century, inquiry on the metals in the era of transition. Good. It's very low-key translation, but anyway. And so it's a book that arrived just at the right moment. It was published last year, and it really blew the minds of many people. Her editor, publisher, is in the room, Claude Rio at the back, if you want to raise your hand. And Claude, I know you've known Celia for a long time because it's not her first book that she's published at your publishing house, but you probably, both of you, thought that this book would very hit hard, I think, and it did. The day it was released, there was an article in Le Devoir, one of the biggest newspapers in Quebec, and everybody was shocked about the content of it, for good reasons, in my opinion. It was long time. Celia was kind of the first in Quebec to come with that solid inquiry about all these metals for transition, with the extent of power she has in her book. She did a better job than we do at Mining Watch, in my opinion, for that, at least in Quebec. And so this is why we're very lucky to have her. Her work comes at a good time to speak about that, and she doesn't go without, you know, a detour. She's going straight at the point, and it's very. We're very lucky to have her. She's also giving conferences to other universities this week. She'll be with us tomorrow and Sunday. She'll attend the Solidarity visit with us, and after that, she will come to Quebec City to attend a conference organized by the Quebec Ministry of Natural Resources, and because she's a journalist as well. She'll be in the room where there will be a discussion about the mining restoration. That on stage there will be people from the industry, the ministry, municipalities, and me. So fighting each other. She'll be in the room to cover that. If they attack me, at least we'll have a witness in the room. But still, then after, Celia is coming with us, with me, driving to La Petite Nation, so 1 hour north of Montreal, so 4-hour drive from Quebec, to see friends of that place, La Petite Nation. Louis Saint-Hilaire, if you want to raise your hand, we're going to sleep at his daughter's house, just the other side of the street. Have a discussion with his committee on the morning, then ride again until Abitibi-Témiscamingue region in Rouyn-Noranda, where Celia is expected to give another conference with citizens there, targeted by the Horn Foundry from Glencore. Jennifer, if you want to raise your hand. Jennifer is living in Rouyn-Noranda, in that city, massively exploited by many mining companies. Celia is coming with us. So just to tell you, the time she's spending with us is very high valued, and we're very happy to have her with us. So yeah, passing over to you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ooh, let's not blow your ears. Thank you very much, Rodrigue. Well, for some reason, I've decided to speak English because I realized that the French-speaking people in this room would be able to read the book and that the others wouldn't. I hope you understand my accent, which has nothing to do with yours. I'll try and speak slowly. So, the good thing about this presentation is that I don't have to do what I usually do, which is present the realities of industrial mining. It's gigantism, the scale of it, the destructiveness of it, which I usually spend quite a lot of time describing, because the shocking thing about our world is that it's so completely ignored. Nobody knows anything about it. So yesterday, for instance, I was at HEC, which is the very, very famous business school, and I had to explain all these things to people from Quebec who are going to enter business, and probably a lot of it related to mining. And they didn't know most of it. Well, I mean, some people did, but... and it's the same in France. So the initial paradox, the strange thing that drove me to write this book, is the fact that in our rich countries, in our rich cities, people have stopped hearing about mining at all for decades. For decades, people would tend to think that mining had disappeared because miners were out of sight, and because there was this general ideology that came from Silicon Valley, and this ideology claimed that it was an immaterial society, that they were building the society of information, and that mines, or anything material, or anything that had to do with petrochemicals or chemistry or metals, didn't need to be around anymore, which always struck me as something completely absurd, considering the relentless avalanche of material things falling on our heads every day, all these objects being renewed, piling up in our houses. So for decades, mining had disappeared from, let's say, the rich world. And then suddenly, about 5 or 10 years ago, depending where, mining suddenly reappeared in the public space, but it reappeared as something that was meant to save the planet. Mining would save us from the worst evil of all times, climate change. Mining would solve this problem through mining for lithium, cobalt, all these critical minerals that are related with the production of batteries and windmills and solar panels. So what struck me is either way, it was completely false. And why these ideological constructions? Because there is obviously something to hide. And there's something that our Western culture is hiding from itself. There's something that the Western culture doesn't want to see about itself, that it is actually a civilization which is completely based on mining, on extraction from the start. And the paradox is that capitalism is completely based on mining. It's directly plugged onto the underground. It's directly plugged onto the mineral world at the expense of the living world, at the expense of this very small fraction of the earth which we can actually inhabit, which is our habitat. But this civilization doesn't want to acknowledge it. So, well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge myself the fact that we are on this Mohawk territory, on lands that have been taken care of for decades, for centuries. And I'm very thankful for it. And I'm also very thankful for everything that I've heard so far, all the stories that you've shared, which were terribly moving. So now that many communities here are struggling with mining projects or the mining heritage, I would like to ask a very simple question, which is, where does it all come from? Why is this happening? Why is all this mining happening? Why is it literally eating up, devouring all the resources that we have and that we need? And this is one of the things I wrote about, this obvious destruction of the habitat. Where does it come from? It's not a rational thing. The Western world always prides itself on being rational. But there is obviously a mystique. There is an element of religion, of a belief in this. And let's go into that. Because if we want to change this, it's not a technical question. It is, of course, a political question. It's a matter of a power relation that we need to build. But it's also a question of what's in our minds. What's the story that we are telling ourselves about the world that we want to build? And if we want to alter that story, I think we should be able to understand it. Because mining and metallurgical activity, the making of metals, is a very strange thing when you think of it. It's very weird. The idea of that was put to me by a friend who's actually a mining engineer. So she's French, and she graduated from a mining engineering school. And at the age of 20-something, she was sent to Canada on the mining, for gold mining. And she was meant to direct the operations, as an engineer. And she was struck by the amount of waste and the amount of distraction and the irreversibility of it all. The damage that could not be repaired. And then she created an association in France, which is called Systext, and they are mining engineers, geologists, and they're documenting the impact of mining, so they're helping communities. And she was the person who described to me all the mining processes and made me understand the way she was viewing it herself, how strange it was. You have a mountain, and you started by removing all the organic matter on the mountain. So you remove everything that's alive. So you skin the earth, and then you reverse the mountain because you turn it into a pit. I went to a mining site in southern Spain, and the mining site was called the mountain, but it was a pit. But it had kept the original name. And then the mountain, you crush it into powder, as thin as the thinnest speck of dust. Isn't that strange? Turning the rock into powder, such thin powder. And then you dip the rock into the most poisonous, the strongest poisons that were ever invented, such as cyanide or acid. And then you cook it at the highest possible temperature. Why would anyone do this? What is this strange ritual that is being performed? And this image, I think, conveys it well. The idea that this small ball of copper is the totality, the sum of everything that's been extracted from this huge copper mine since it began. And so this ball is this white point, the dot over there. It's only that. Isn't that strange? Isn't that a very strange thing to do? But now this is extremely paradoxical. It's a contradictory thing to do. But the paradox, as I said before, is growing. Because for several years we have known there is a terrible ecological crisis. We have known that there is climate change, global warming, caused by CO2 emissions and deforestation, destruction of forests, pollution and overuse of water. We have known that the species are disappearing and that there's air pollution which is causing lots of death. And mining is obviously responsible for many of this, not much of this, I mean. It is recognized as one of the main factors of these problems globally. For instance, causing between 8 or 10% of CO2 emissions, which is huge. And now, the World Bank and the International Energy Agency and other actors have managed, while trying to convince people, that mining could be a solution. Of course, if we can make mining carbon neutral, of course, that's only a detail, of course. Mining being put forward as a remedy. So, of course, I wrote this book because I couldn't accept it. I mean, I felt, wow, if we don't contradict this immediately, we're going to become crazy. So it's a matter of mental health. We have to defend ourselves. And of course, the extent of the distraction that has been achieved so far in like 200 years of industrial capitalism and 500 years of conquest and capitalism, this should lead us to do exactly the opposite. Meaning to draw a very severe judgment on this industry, because, I mean, what is the ecological crisis? What's global warming, if not the direct consequence of a civilization that's based on extraction? I mean, this world is based on exploiting the possibilities of the energy that's on the ground, fossil fuels, and the technical possibilities of metals. And instead of putting this into question radically, there's a multiplication of it. There's a surge of it. So I feel that despite all this speech about change, there is an obvious continuity in this system, which I think you convey very well when you talk about the stories of indigenous communities in Canada or in the United States. And I've noticed that all the ideologies that the Western world, which is the Western civilization, has put forward in order to justify itself, were accompanied by a rush in mining. The first of it was civilization, the idea of civilizing, well, the Americas first. The second one was progress, civilization, and then progress. And then, later in the 20th century, development, justification for building the industrial infrastructure of the post-war era. And then today, the transition, which shows how the transition, in fact, is logically a continuation of the rest and is not at all a check in the system. like an attempt to correct it, but rather an expansion of the system. The system is expanding thanks to the idea of the transition. So as a famous phrase, as in a famous phrase from an Italian film, we could say that everything must change for things to remain the same. And that's the transition. So when we say that mining, and we have to remember that mining is the core of Western capitalism, well, let's talk about this a little bit. I was very inspired by the ability to try and see it from the outside, although I'm an insider. But I was inspired by the words of a member of an indigenous community from Amazonia, who's called Davi Kopenawa, and he's a shaman from the Yanomami people in Amazonia. And he left an amazing book about his people. And he says this. He says, very recently, by the way, he says this a few years ago. He says, white people don't understand that when they tear minerals out of the earth, they poison the world and that the world will die from it. We, Yanomami, we don't skin the earth. We only cultivate the surface of it, its richest part. White people have more than enough metal to build their goods and their machines. But in spite of this, they keep digging the earth ceaselessly, like giant armadillos. This is the reason why we call them Urihi Wapope, the soil eaters, the earth eaters, the soil eaters. They think they will not contaminate themselves with their toxic fumes as much as they contaminate us. But they are wrong. I felt I didn't know what a giant armadillo was, so I had to look at a picture. So it's funny. So this is the white people. And they call them the soil eaters because they mine all the time. So to dig the earth relentlessly like giant armadillos, that's interesting. It's exactly what we've been doing for 5 centuries. Since the conquest of the Americas. And even more since the Industrial Revolution. And even more in the last 20 years. In fact, in the last 25 years, more minerals have been extracted than in the whole history of mankind. This is kind of trend that we're in. And the incredible thing is that during this quarter of a century, like the past 25 years, people in most richest place in the world, they thought that mining had ceased to exist. They were not, even conscious of it. Well, empires in general have always relied on mining and metallurgy. This is one of the trends. This is one of their characteristics as opposed to different societies, other societies than imperial societies. But capitalism is specific in the sense that it relies more heavily on mining than even the former antique empires. First of all, because it is based on endless accumulation. The idea of the treasure, gold, the treasure, the money. This is one of the main pillars of this religion. If we say that capitalism is based on a mystique, and that this mystique is itself based on extraction, then the first pillar of this mystique is accumulation. It's money, it's the treasure. what does it stand for? As one of you said before today, it's also a very strange thing to remove gold from underground to go and put it somewhere else on the ground, in the coffers of a Swiss bank on the ground, for instance. It's a weird thing to do. What does it stand for? Well, you probably know this quote from Christopher Columbus. He would say in his diary that gold sends the souls to heaven. He who has gold can go to heaven. And in effect, gold was the aim of the conquest. The initial tragedy was caused by gold, so by this fetish, which is a strange disease. It was actually presented as a disease by Cortés himself when he addressed the Emperor Moctezuma in 1519. He said to his messenger, because they wanted to meet Moctezuma, they said to his messenger, "Tell him that my companions and I suffer from a terrible disease that only gold can cure." And it was, of course, it was a lie, but it was a very, very sincere lie, in a way. So the conquest is really the first step of the constitution of capitalism, and it's based on mining and the expansion of activities which are derived from mining. For instance, the plantation, the colonial agriculture, is treating the soil like a mine, as a non-renewable. The historian Galeano from Bolivia describes it very simply and says, America had become a vast mine whose entrance was at Potosi. And Potosi is the famous silver mine in present Peru. In the former Peru, present Bolivia. So the American mines, the slavery imposed on indigenous people, and then the slave trade from Africa, they have allowed for the most tremendous process of accumulation in human history. And this money has, in turn, triggered the Industrial Revolution, which will really happen 2 centuries after that, start to happen 2 centuries after that, which will lead us, because we're advancing across history with very big legs, to the second pillar of this religion, the capitalist religion, which has to do with extraction, which in my eyes is technology. The first one being accumulation, the second one being technology. Our world is based on the reverence for money and the reverence for technology. And this is the second very big step, is the frenzy to transform matter, and not just to accumulate, but to build a world off the ground. The beginning of the building of an extraterrestrial world, which is the specificity of the way that Westerners inhabit the Earth. They live off the ground. And in fact, for instance, if you listen to Elon Musk, the head of Tesla, I mean, they don't really want to live on the planet at all. They want to make mankind a multi-planetary civilization. And that also is a mystique. It's not rational at all. I mean, it's not possible. Or maybe it's possible for 5 or 10 people, and the rest of us just die for lack of everything. But it's important because it's the drive, the ideological drive, that causes this soil eating, this giant armadillo behavior that I'm trying to understand. So the money from the conquest of the America served to finance the Industrial Revolution. It financed the steam engine that Watt designed and which developed from the 18th century. And it financed the Industrial Revolution based on steel and coal, which started in England and then expanded across the world. And then, in turn, this Industrial Revolution accelerated the conquest. So made it possible that there should be more extraction everywhere. And relentlessly pushed this frontier, this extractive frontier, which is still being pushed forward in Quebec, in Canada, in America, and in lots of other places in the world. There's a geologist who says, trade follows the flag, but the flag follows the pick. Le commerce suit le drapeau, mais le drapeau suit le pic du mineur. Which shows how the role of mining is very central to the conquest. And so the other continuity is that these extractive frontiers have never ceased to move forward in a very similar way, converting populations to the capitalist lifestyle and preventing them from ensuring their own subsistence. I call it a gigantic uprooting machine. The fact that these extractive projects render people completely, that they lose their autonomy. It was already described in the 16th century in a very famous text, a classic book by Agricola, who was one of the first mining engineers. And in this famous long series of books called De Metallica, he would describe this. People hate mining because it poisons the rivers, it prevents them from fishing and from doing any sort of agriculture. We must explain to them that the good thing about mining is that it gives them some money so they can buy all these things that they can't have anymore. This is a very old story. And now the genocide and the ethnocide caused by the advance of this extractive frontier is extremely, it seems to be generalized. You talk about it here, but it's happening in Burma, for instance, because the Chinese state has started to delocalize the production of rare earths. And it's being delocalized by Chinese companies in Burma, where hundreds of indigenous people live in the forest. It's happening in India, where the Adivasi, which are the First Nations in India, are being killed to give way for bauxite, coal, and other extractive industries. It's happening, of course, in Congo, but it's also happening in other parts of Africa. It's even happening in Europe, in Northern Europe. There are indigenous people who are called Sami, and many mining projects are, in fact, affecting them directly. Why are we digging the earth relentlessly, as I said? Because capitalism is based on a religion, which is a religion, as I've said, of money and technology, which relies on extraction. So, since it works that way, it is not surprising that in order to try and solve the biggest problem that there ever was, the idea should be to do more mining. Because it's the basic creed of this civilization. It is what has always relied on. So there's nothing else, of course. This is what I called the extractivist cosmology. A cosmology is a world vision, a bit like a religion. And this extractivist cosmology is a world vision based on the idea that extraction can make you reach the sky. As Columbus would say, like, gold sends you to heaven. Gold sends you to heaven, but the industry sends you to other planets. It works both ways. It works with money and it works with technology. And it has to do with the Christian religions. During the scientific revolution in England, in the 17th century, the people who started thinking of using technology to better the world, to build powerful means of production, to build abundance, a bounty. These people thought that the important thing with mining and metals was that the domination of manhood of Adam, which Adam had lost during the fall in the Christian religion, would be restored. So the idea was to restore the might of manhood over the planet. Well, it seems this idea still runs. But now, this is an exploration, just sharing my thoughts on this. But now I'm going to be much more practical, and it's going to be a big clash. We're going to talk about the rush for metals in the 21st century and now, because I think we have to keep in mind what is causing it now, not only in the ideology, not only in the stories that the Western world tells itself, but also practically due to what some thinkers have called the imperial lifestyle. Capitalism has invented an imperial lifestyle and generalized it. And what is an imperial lifestyle? It's a way of life which is based on the availability of an empire. You need to have an empire if you want to have all these objects at hand, because of all the resources that these objects require. The water, the material, the energy. And the main reason for the rush for metals is not the transition. It's not the fact that the elites are suddenly trying to save the world. It's just the fact that the imperial lifestyle is expanding and is increasing. There are more and more imperial goods in any kind of lifestyle in the rich countries. And even poor people have to have these goods. That's the paradox. So I was saying mining has doubled, like the mining extraction has doubled over the past 20 years, and the two main reasons for it are the fact that all the states that were from the south are now industrializing, building infrastructure, factories, dams, electrical grids. And that's one of the tragedies that we have to acknowledge, is the fact that decolonization has happened, but the core, the essence of colonization has remained, which is capitalism, which is the fact that there is no, there's hardly any competing idea of how to live in the world, how to inhabit the world, besides the industrial capitalist lifestyle. And indigenous communities are the few societies which are trying to maintain alive alternative visions of how to live in the world. And the second reason why which accounts for this mining rush is, as I said, because the imperial lifestyle is increasing, because in the 1960s, in the 1970s, there was a movement in the USA, across all Europe, and people were protesting because of consumer society. And they were saying, life has become meaningless because we are surrounded with goods that we don't need, and we're destroying everything for these goods. But when you think of what people used to have in the 60s, it's ridiculous. They had like radio appliances, an oven, maybe a television, but not surely. And when you think of how this material base has expanded over decades, it's amazing. And this is causing the rush for metals. Voilà, the following image. This is a very simple illustration of the fact that the objects that we are surrounded with contain more and more metals, a diverse range of metals. For instance, in a single smartphone, could you pass? In a single, no, don't have it. Could you go forward, please? No. Voilà. In a single smartphone, we have over 50 different metals. So it's basically nearly all the metals and metalloids that are known. They are incorporated into this. And of course, the quantities that are requested are very, very small, like micrograms or nanograms. But this use of many, many different metals in a single appliance means that they cannot be recycled. For instance, in a smartphone, you're going to have arsenic. Arsenic, which, as you know, is a poison. And this arsenic is very, very important to the making of electronics, to the extent that electronic makers lobbied to prevent it from being banned in Europe a few years ago. And they said, arsenic is absolutely needed in our supply chain. But in a smartphone, arsenic is present at 160 different places. It's like gold being present at something like 80 different places in the phone. So you will not retrieve it. It's just too small. If you wanted to build like the industrial capacity to re-extract these metals from the machines, you'd have the most polluting facilities, like the most polluting factories that you could ever imagine. It would be like 100 times the Horn foundry, something like that. So we are using more and more metals in quantity, but also more and more metals in diversity. And could we go back to the first plane, please? Voilà. That's. I live in the southwest of France, and there's an empire. There's an industrial empire next to where I live. It's called Airbus. It's the first aeronautics makers, like the builder of aircraft in the world. And it builds 700 planes a year. So you can make a calculation how many planes that is in a day. It's more like it's nearly 2 planes in a day. It's absolutely huge when you think of the amount of metals that each plane contains. For instance, hundreds of tons of lithium, because aircraft relies on the use of aluminium lithium alloys, and of course hundreds of other alloys. So one of the reasons for the new European law for critical metals is actually Airbus. And sorry. And although we are explained all the time we get explanations about how we need metals for windmills and solar panels and batteries, there is never a single justification of how we need all these metals to produce aircraft, which is contributing very heavily to global warming, and that we should actually stop now. This is where I want to take you with this presentation. I want to show how we need to start discussing very strongly the demand for metals, not just the impact of mining and metallurgy on communities, on the environment, but the demand for metal, which is completely unsustainable, and which is something we who live not necessarily in mining places, but in the centers of power, should be doing. Okay, you want to open a lithium mine for batteries for the transition. Then we need a clear guarantee that this production will actually be used for something sustainable. And at the moment, you can absolutely not guarantee that. So for the plane, and then the following is the tank, please. Other critical uses, thank you very much. Critical uses are, of course, the weapons industry. It's very important. So the amounts that are used for the weapons industry are small in comparison to, for instance, the automobile industry. Like something like 5% of the total demand. It depends on the minerals. The problem is that the pressure to have this and to have a secure supply is so strong that it actually changes the policies. And then I can show you the next image, which is a satellite. It's upside down, something like that. Oh no, that's a very useful tool, you see. It's also being constructed next to where I live, where there's a whole aerospace industry, and it is a response to the incentive to make humans a multi-planetary species. This is very useful in the sense that this satellite built by Thales, the French company, serves the purpose of having internet in planes. You see, so all these metals there, all the precious alloys, all the gold, the beryllium, the silver, the titanium that is being put in these machines serves the purpose of having internet on board when you're flying. We should be questioning these things. And the space industry is consuming more and more metals. Can we have the following, please? Because more and more satellites are being launched. You see, you have a curve here that shows you the trend. In fact, what we could say in a way is that the mining rush is a direct consequence of the accumulation of money. What's happening at the moment is that a few companies have accumulated immense wealth, and that thanks to neoliberalism, thanks to the policies that we've had for decades now. And there's no democratic control of this use of wealth, so you have billionaires using this money to fulfill their dreams, such as space conquest, space travel, or launching satellites. And that is really putting us at risk, and it's completely unacceptable from the point of view of our collective interest. Okay, another example is the following image is, it's very boring, sorry, you're going to fall asleep, we're not going to stay there. This is a table and it's showing you the amount of metals that are to be found in a car battery. It shows you how much metals are requested in a big car, which shows you how unacceptable it is to have cars that are over 1 ton, you see. Because the first column is an electric bike, and you have a few grams of each metals, like, for instance, 50 grams of lithium. And the biggest car uses 10 kilos of lithium. The biggest car uses 86 kilos of graphite. It's so before making people guilty by telling them, if you want to save the planet, then you have to accept this lithium mine. Otherwise, you're being selfish. Well, of course, the first thing that is requested is a law forbidding the making of cars which are over 1 ton. They just shouldn't exist. They have no reason to exist. That's the first thing to do. The rest is, well, shouldn't be argued about. And then the use I wanted to talk about is well, that shows how cars have got bigger. Like, I drive this yellow car, more or less, and I'm surrounded by giant armadillo cars. And that's a big problem. And thank you. They're just not in the right. Go forward. Ah, voilà. And this is a data center. And I wanted to tell you about this in more details because I think it's very important. Behind the rush for metals, for the so-called transition, and the fight against climate change, there is largely the supply of metals for the digital industry, because it's the sector that is growing the fastest. It's the sector of the economy which is growing at the rate of over 30% a year, which is completely mad. But of course, it grows so fast because so much money has been accumulated that these multi-billionaire companies have all the means to accelerate the pace of everything. And so the demand for metals due to these uses is a complete vortex. It's vertiginous, it's huge. Why? Well, first of all, because of what I'm showing you now. A data center, you know, is the place where all the data, the information is stored. And there are more and more data centers, and they're bigger and bigger. And each one of them can consume as much energy as a whole city. So what's happening? What is happening is that Amazon and Google, which are leading the market of storage of this data, in order to be acceptable, they have to say, yeah, but we're using renewable energy. So they are monopolizing all the metals that are being used for renewable energies, such as windmills and solar panels and so on. But these solar farms, for instance, they are being used to power data centers. And what do data centers contain? Well, they contain marketing information like advertisement, pornography, mostly. And, well, all this is accelerating very quickly. And also, the need for metals created by the digital industry is huge because of what I've shown you before, like the smartphone and the very, very, very small components. Well, in a data center like that, it's all made of electronics. So everything that's in it is extremely small. So impossible to recycle. But this is treated as a dispensable appliances, in the sense that in order to make these data centers very, very efficient in order to guarantee that there will be no cut and that you'll be able to access your PayPal application 24 hours on. These servers in the data centers, they are changed, they're being replaced every 2 or 3 years. So all these metals are just being dumped and replaced. And of course, this is driving the mining rush. Voilà, so, and now we're facing yet another peril, which is called artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, as for instance, ChatGPT, is based on the fact of using 10 times more energy in order to have artificial thought, I mean supercomputerized thinking, which is basically what it is. And artificial intelligence consumes, in fact, so much energy and so many metals, so much mineral production, that the multi-billionaires, such as the GAFAM, such as Amazon, Google, etc., are actually investing very heavily in the nuclear industry. And they are driving the nuclear drive now. I mean, the search for nuclear power. For instance, because of artificial intelligence, Microsoft has decided to invest in reopening a nuclear reactor in 3 Mile Island, where the nuclear accident happened in the United States in 1979. And, well, they're all kind of doing something like that, like financing nuclear startups. How are we time-wise? Because I don't have time. Wow. Okay. Maybe finish soon. Are you,
I think we have workshops at 4.
well, okay, it's time to conclude and we can have a discussion because that's very important. Voilà. These are just examples. I could have selected other examples, but what I mean to say is that these uses for metals have to be contested very, very strongly by the movements, by the social movements, and this is a way to create a bond between the people who are active against mining impacts and the people who elsewhere will address, will criticize the infrastructural projects, will ask for a will organize a boycott of artificial intelligence for these reasons, will demand that the transition should be, in fact, a degrowth policy, because the only way to attend to this mining rush is to organize degrowth as democratically as possible. The other reason to do that is the water problem, which probably has been addressed before in a caucus. Research shows that 2/3 of mining extraction occurs in places where there is not enough water, in places that are threatened with drought, which should lead us to the conclusion that at least 2/3 of mining operations should close down. So we have to try and think democratically how to invent a lifestyle that is compatible with the closure of 2/3 of all mining sites, which is exactly the opposite of what's happening. Of course, we can't multiply the mineral production by 5, 10, or 20 as planned. We have to shut down more than 2/3 of all mines. Voilà. But in order to do this, I think there are two basic things. Two evils that we have to fight. And these two evils are the basics of this capitalist religion, which I talked about before. We have to fight money. We have to fight accumulation, because accumulation is really driving the ecological crisis, and it's driving the mining rush. Because all this accumulation of wealth is accelerating the pace of industrialization, is increasing the energy and the minerals used in lifestyle. So they're directly responsible for this crisis. So, of course, we have to encourage all the policies that put an end to the over-accumulation of wealth. And the second one is technology. We have to stop viewing ecology and the defense of communities as a technological matter. The evil of the situation is that ecology has been treated as a technical matter. If you treat it as a technical matter, you absolutely don't alter the course of everything that's been happening so far. On the contrary, you stimulate the system, because the system is based on the development of technology. It will thrive on technological challenges, and we mustn't let it thrive. So that means that we have to develop other world visions than the one that is based on technology. And for that, you, I think, are the people and the communities who should help us. Voilà, I think indigenous communities across the world who are threatened with mining industries are the most legitimate to develop their vision of a sustainable future and put it forward against the imperial lifestyle. And we don't hear your voice quite enough on these subjects, and we'd like to find ways to make it more audible. Thank you.